the reason why craft is higher than art is, think about this. In Korea, when some kid like comes to you and he just creates like his own little like artistic drawing, like that's like totally random, its own creation, and he gives it to you, a lot of Koreans will think like, oh, that's like, why don't you just copy like the great works? Why are you doing your own thing? You don't know enough to actually be able to say anything unique, and so you're just gonna be like regurgitating what they have regurgitated. Everyone has for thousands of years. If you want to say something unique, you need to first know what has already been said.
Hello everyone, and welcome back to Conversations from the Hearth. This is Jesse, along with Master Olds. Today we're going to be talking about our quote of the month for September. This month's quote comes from Ed Catmull. Craft is what we are expected to know. Art is the unexpected use of our craft. Now, this quote is pulled from a book by Ed Catmull called Creativity, Inc. And for those of you who don't know, Ed Catmull is one of the co-founders of Pixar, the animation studio. So Creativity Inc. is the story of, Ed Catmull and Pixar itself. It starts when he's a young man and goes all the way up to the present, and just tells the story of how you build a company like that has reached so many people all across the world, that is rooted in art and creativity and being able to manage that sort of thing. I was drawn to this quote because we, in the dojang, outside of the dojang, are martial artists, and I've been thinking a lot about the martial arts as a way of creative expression and as a way of life. So when I heard, craft is what we're expected to know, I think, okay, what is the craft of the martial arts, and then where does the art come in, and how do we use that unexpectedness to increase our art and to enrich our art on and off the floor. With that, I'll turn it over, Master Olds. Do you have any thoughts about this quote or anything?
Yeah, when I first read that quote, I haven't read his book, but I'm kind of interested, how does that quote sort of connect with this idea of building a company?
So he was really intent on maintaining a standard of quality that could be carried throughout into perpetuity, right? So with Walt Disney, you have this thing where, Disney and did all the animation at the beginning and then built up this amazing thing, and when Walt Disney passed away, there was this void left in the company where everybody was like, well, we have no direction because Walt Disney isn't here anymore. And Ed Catmull, growing up around the same time that Disney was booming and witnessing the death of Walt Disney and the change in that company, he said, okay, how do we avoid something like that, and how do we ensure that the art and the quality of the art and the quality of the company and atmosphere is consistent, even when its original founders are gone.
Yeah.
And that's the beauty of the book, and the title is Creativity Inc., right? Creativity Incorporated. So how do you take this amorphous thing that is the creative process and systematize it and standardize it and say, we have a deadline, we have to make this movie, Toy Story, within 2 years, go. Right?
Yeah. And you were telling me that story about how he had a long rectangular table,
yes,
right?
Sir.
And then he it's like, why are we doing this? Like, this doesn't make any sense. Like,
yes,
everyone's so far away from the action, they're not really able to contribute, and, just thinking a little creatively, decided to turn to a round table or something
yes, sir.
like that?
Taking the huge 30-foot long meeting table that they were using and saying, this isn't working because we've got people all the way down here, they can't talk to each other, they can't see each other, we've got people around the table on the walls. He said, this isn't working, we need to make a circular table where everybody gets input and can see each other. So.
Yeah, when I think about the martial arts, it's definitely, you get people who like to say, like, it's martial science, we teach martial science here,
yes, sir.
but for as scientific as martial arts can be, it's always going to be an art, because the science that your opponent has put together dictates the science that you need to put together.
Yes, sir.
So if they're coming at you with mostly punches, your game is very different than if they're coming mostly kicks, or whatever punches they use, or whatever kicks they use, or if they're more of a grappler. And it's so fluid and dynamic that there's no, it's way too complicated to be an exact science. There's certain ways of, scientifically generating power, but then it's also like a balance, like between power and economy of motion, balance. So it's, you could have a really, really powerful knockout punch that's just completely devastating, but if it doesn't have the footwork associated with it to get you into reach of hitting somebody,
Yes, sir.
it means nothing. So it's a very complicated, artistic experience, I feel like. And so, when these terms of martial science kind of came into popularity, or I am not a martial artist, I'm a fighter, I always kind of pulled away from that. Not initially, because I kind of just hit me from the side, but over time, as I sort of saw how those were used, I realized, no, we're martial artists, and we should be proud to be that. And I think there's a casting off of everything that's old and traditional to embrace something new, and we need to remember that there's a lot of good things associated with that. So definitely in art, the way that you, everyone has a different game they play. In Taekwondo, we have certain bread and butter techniques, but the techniques that you focus on can be radically different. The way that Master Sana plays Taekwondo is very different from the way I play it. She has certain techniques like axe kick and hook kick, skip hook kick, that are her very, very best techniques, and she has her whole game plan is designed around that. And that's in stark contrast to me. So, but they both have a lot of viability, and they're just different artistic styles. You look at the forms, and the forms are also, we have the set patterns that we have to go through, but the pace at which we go through the pattern, the focus at which we approach the whole pattern as a whole, every movement, the way we breathe is uniquely our own, and is very artistic, I think, as well.
Yes, sir.
But there's one thing I really wanted to talk about, and that is the difference between art and craft, which was kind of brought up there.
Yes,
and I
sir.
think craft gets a lot of scorn in Western society. I remember when I was in 7th or 8th grade, I had a really great art teacher that I loved, and she always talked so down on craft. We're not doing craft here, guys. We're doing art. This is art. And when I went to Korea, I encountered the complete opposite. And I encountered that same experience through all my art classes in high school and stuff like that. But when I went to Korea, they said, craft is the highest and art is down here. And that was really mind-boggling to me, because everything I had been taught, through my life was that art was the greatest. But when they never really explicitly said this, but over the years of being a part of it and listening to what people were saying and understanding their point of view, you sort of kind of put together a picture. And the reason why craft is higher than art is, think about this. In Korea, when some kid comes to you and he just creates his own little artistic drawing, that's totally random, its own creation, and he gives it to you, a lot of Koreans will think oh, that's why don't you just copy the great works? Why are you doing your own thing? You don't know enough to actually be able to say anything unique, and so you're just going to be regurgitating what they have regurgitated. Everyone has for thousands of years. If you want to say something unique, you need to first know what has already been said. And so you have to study the great works first. Go copy the greatest works. And that's one of the reasons why all the Chinese, Koreans, Japanese, they copy all of our stuff. And it's not a show of disrespect, it's a show of respect. They value the way that we do things so much that they want to just copy it directly. And then once they are good enough to be at our level, they will start doing their own thing. But they won't do their own thing until they think they are as good as us. So as long as they're copying us, that shows that they actually respect us more than them in that area. So it's something that's very misunderstood. We think, oh, they're just trying to steal our stuff, and people need to be able to have their own, intellectual property and protect themselves and whatnot. And I think, patents are very important, but I just think the context in which that's coming from, a lot of Westerners just don't understand. And, this reminds me of a couple of things in my own life that I've experienced. I used to train in wilderness survival under a man named Tom Brown Jr. He was trained by an Apache Shadow Scout, a very proficient wilderness survivalist and tracker. And the way he tracked is there's like 2 levels of tracking. There's like signed tracking, which is like very low level. You see some blood on the ground, you follow it. You see a track, you say, okay, which direction is the track going? Maybe you know what animal's track that is, but more than that, you don't really know. But then there's pressure tracking, which you actually look at how the track degrades over months and years. Well, not years, but weeks and months. And the way that the track degrades will tell you a lot about the way that the track was made. Yes. And when you study that enough, you start to learn things like, oh, this animal is pregnant. This animal has to go pee. This animal is sexually aroused or horny. And these very, just crazy stuff, to the fact that Tom Brown Jr. could tell if somebody was a smoker just by the way that they would walk. And he said that he had to learn, I don't remember how many it was, but 500 different pressure tracks from his master, who he called grandfather. And after his entire life of 40 years of studying it, at the end he could only add 3 more tracks. That was all he could figure out, was 3 more things to add. And that's what his teacher had basically added too, was a couple of extra tracks, not a lot. And that, I think, is the fundamental way that Koreans and Asians see the world. Is it's their art, and you are adding to their art. Not your art. We are very narcissistic in the West, and so it's our art, my art, right? And so I have something unique I am trying to express. Where they're this is our art. We need to first figure out what our people have done for thousands of years and how they have made art, and then we can add a few extra things onto that. That are our own unique expression, that are moving our culture forward a little bit.
Yes, sir. I wanted to touch on that for a moment. Something I wrote down beforehand was this idea of passing along and passing along the teaching, and how that's something that I really find is just one of the wonderful, beautiful parts of this traditional martial arts setting. I as you know, joined the martial arts just a couple years ago. I was in college when I first started, and so I'm only a couple years in, and from the get-go I was this is a beautiful thing. It's about lineage. We've got our lineage hanging in the dojang, and to be able to look up and say, how many hundreds and thousands of years have gone into this moment where this transmission of knowledge is being exchanged, and how many thousands of years have gone into, okay, we're going to punch, this way with our thumb on the outside as opposed to this way, or all these little nuancy things. And for me, that's a huge part of the romance of the martial arts, but also the integrity of the martial arts. As you were saying, you don't, nothing gets in and works unless it works. You learn very quickly what works on the floor and what doesn't, and what so much of the challenge is not figuring out what doesn't work, but trying to structure your game, as you referred to it, structure your game in a way that you can respond and make it work in your favor, right? Because very quickly it is, oh, I'm getting kicked in the head, oh, I'm getting kicked in the leg, oh, okay, so I'll move my leg, but now this, it's this isn't working, this isn't working, this isn't working. And then there's that one sliver, every once in a while, it's oh, that worked. Let me hold on to that and see if I can refine that moment, that movement, and take that forward as we continue to exchange.
there is this beautiful balance. Creativity, in my opinion, is like you have a ravenous mind for exploration, and you want to try to like look at things at different angles, right? And I have a ADD, and so I'm very good at that. Like my mind is always looking at different angles.
Yes, sir.
But there's another aspect of creativity which is also very important, which if I think someone ADD can figure out how to do, is very powerful. And that's one of the reasons why I like working with kids with ADD, because I feel like I can help them a lot. But if you can learn to focus your mind, and you can learn to figure out, okay, so there's all these different angles, but what angles work?
Yes, sir.
That's when you start coming up with really creative ideas. Because you're like, okay, well, here's all these different, like let's say you're drawing, you're making a painting or something, right? Like you might have all these really crazy paintings, but what ones are really capturing the emotion? What ones have the simplest line? The best gestalt. Like you have to figure out what those winning principles are. But I think if you can figure out those winning principles, then having that very creative mind that's always looking around and trying to see the different angle is also very helpful. But you need both, because if you just have one, you go into chaos. And I think that's a little bit what the Asians are saying is like, look, if you're a little kid and you don't know anything about art, if you just start going like off on your own and you just start drawing randomly, you have a tendency to get kind of stuck in a position where you don't really know what are the foundational rules of good art, right? And I'll tell you, I studied English in college, and I was a hardcore writer when I was in high school. I would go to the writing lab every single day with my own personal works to get proofed by the teachers there. And one of the problems I had early on in writing is I had my own very unique writing style.
Yes, sir. That
was like no one could understand but me, but it felt so me, right? It was like this all makes so sense to me. But the thing that you have to learn is like writing is like a combination of like expressing yourself, but also understanding everyone else. So you have to understand how like people think, like how people normally write, so that you can figure out how you can connect with how people normally think, and then bring them into your own little world. You see what I'm saying?
Yes.
But if you don't know how like people normally put together words in their mind, when they go to read your writing, they'll think it's clunky.
Yes, sir.
They won't understand it. So you have to know how like most people in your language think and put together their words first before you can start creatively putting together words, because the way you put together your words has to intersect with the way that they put together their words. So it's very important to learn those foundations first, or you'll just start spinning your wheels.
Right.
And I'm not saying that having your kids just draw to their heart's content is a bad thing. I mean, I think there's some lessons in the West that are also important too. I certainly, when I was a kid, I drew all sorts of stuff, and 90% of it was terrible, but I think it got my creative spirit juices going, and that's what opened my mind and started to have it think from different angles. I think there's an opposite aspect of this, is where if you just follow, you become sort of a sheep, and you have trouble thinking creatively. And you look at some Asian companies now realize how important creativity is, and nobody in their society is creative, so they bring in like Westerners to teach their people about creativity so they can start thinking outside the box. So you do need both. I'm definitely not saying that you should just only go down one side of craft, but I think Westerners don't value craft enough, and I think maybe Easterners don't value creativity enough,
So one final thought I wanted to make sure got into the video was this idea of practice, right? We've talked about, the craft path, which is learn the lessons that the masters have to teach you, right? And I think that's, so important, and the only way to do that is to practice, right? To look at, for me, I always think, look at the Van Gogh painting, or look at the, any of the great works, any of the great works of the painters, and say, okay, can I do that, right? What is it that they're doing there? Like, can I figure out how to move my brush like that and to get that color and to like, there's so much that goes into the masterpieces. That's why they're called the masterpieces. And
Yeah.
I think taking that concept and applying it to the martial arts as well, right? When you look at, you just shared a video in our band of this woman, I can't remember her name, doing a form. Yes, at an incredibly high level. And from the moment she bowed, before she even started her form, my jaw dropped. I was like, I can't do that. Like I can't bow like that. It was so much presence of mind and intentionality.
Yeah.
And so I completely agree that path, there's so much there to learn from and to pull from, and that's history, that's the ancestry and the lineage. And on the flip side is the new creation, right? This idea of, okay, well, I am here now and I've got this history behind me. What can I do with it? And that is kind of what I was talking about earlier. You will find out very quickly what doesn't work, right? Mm-hmm. And so much of the creative process at the beginning is, this doesn't really work. Like this just doesn't work, right? And that's that's how it is for the kiddos as well, who don't have the frame of mind of, what is a masterpiece. But as adults, we look at children's drawings and we can come from a place of love and say, I'm so glad that you're working on this and creating this, and we will hang it on the fridge. But then, as adults, I go back and look at my childhood drawings. I'm like, that looks nothing like a horse, or whatever it is, right? It's just so funny. But there is that creative generation, right? That creativity itself that is forward-thinking and future-oriented. So we've got the craft and lineage and history and masterworks coming from the past.
Yeah.
And then yes, sir.
Yeah, no, exactly. I really like this idea of, craft, and I think one of the reasons why we don't value craft enough in the West, maybe because we don't value history and lineage and our culture enough, because that's kind of, we're standing on the shoulders of giants.
Yes, sir.
And we need to respect those people who have come before us and taught us everything we know. Sometimes I hear people kind of talk down about, their parents' generation, or because they don't really know anything about the science of today. How it's had changed a little bit.
Yes,
but everything you know now is because of what they learned during their generation, and everything they knew then is everything that the generation before them knew. So it's very important to respect that that lineage, that history, so that we can expound on it and we can be creative and do our own thing, and add our own little mark to the world.
Yes, sir.
I wanted to kind of, end note, like, guys, if you have any thoughts on art and craft and creativity in general, leave those comments below. I believe both art and craft are very, very important, in their own ways. You need them both. And I want to kind of wrap it up with a little story. When I first started doing Taekwondo, I remember my master said to me, Michael, you need to empty your cup.
Yes, sir.
And just leave it all at the door, step onto the mats, don't think about it too much, just go through the exercises, just say yes sir, push yourself, and eventually your body will learn what to do. And if you try to be too creative right at the very beginning, you're going to miss the lessons that are being taught to you. Mm-hmm. Later on, when you're a black belt and you have some experience, then you can start, mixing up your own pot of tea. But until then, you really need to just be open to learning what has been taught to me.
Yes, sir.
What has come before you. And so I think that's exactly what we're talking about here, guys. How art and craft sort of intersect in the martial arts in exactly that way.
Yes, sir.
Anyway, let's keep one foot in the fire. Let's keep training hard. If you enjoyed that podcast, please consider liking and subscribing to our YouTube channel, as well as hitting the notification bell. We offer in-person, group, and private lessons at our facility in Kyle, Texas, as well as virtual lessons anywhere in the world. If you'd like to learn more about our programs, you can find us online at risingphoenixtkd.com.